Wow, you really went all out with these sources for this deep dive. The Quatermass Experiment. Huh. We've got, let's see, film reviews, so script excerpts, wiki entries, even a comic book adaptation.
It's quite a collection, isn't it?
Someone's been doing their homework.
It shows how this story, even though it started way back in 1953 on BBC television, it just keeps coming back.
Right, and that's what I find so fascinating. What is it about this story from almost 70 years ago that still grabs us today? What's the secret?
Well, one part of it, I think, is the historical context.
Okay, yeah, paint me a picture.
Imagine, it's 1953, the world's trying to recover from World War II, but there's this looming threat of the Cold War. And then all of a sudden, everyone's looking up at the sky, excited and scared about the space race.
Right, so it's not just about rockets and astronauts. There's this underlying sense of, like, dread, right? Like this leap into space could unleash something dangerous.
Exactly. And don't forget, back then, television was still pretty new. So when the Quatermass Experiment came on the BBC, it was a huge deal. Like, families gathered around their TVs experiencing this terrifying story together live.
Oh, wow. So you've got this Cold War tension, everyone's already on edge, and then the Quatermass Experiment throws in a British rocket launch. What could go wrong, right?
Well, as you might guess, a lot can go wrong. The mission doesn't go as planned, and of the 3 astronauts, only one comes back, Victor Carroon.
And I've been reading these sources. This is not a happy return. Victor Carroon is. Well, he's different.
That's putting it mildly. There's this one line in the script that always gives me chills. The spacesuited Carroon stumbles out. Inside, there's no sign of the other 2 crewmen.
Ooh, yeah.
It's so stark, immediately you know something is terribly wrong.
It's like a punch in the gut.
No.
You know something's off, but you don't know what. And the actor, Richard Wordsworth, who played Carroon, from what I've gathered, he really captures that sense of otherworldly dread.
Oh, absolutely. He doesn't even have much dialogue, but his performance is incredible. He manages to show this feeling of profound alienation, like something not human is taking over him.
Okay, so that brings us to, I think, the core of the horror here. Carroon's transformation. These sources, they describe it in such vivid detail. It's unsettling, to say the least. His flesh is swollen, coarsened. Even his bones are changing shape. And then there's that image, I think, from the 2005 remake of Carroon's body merging with a cactus.
Oh, yes. That image is so powerful, so unexpected. It plays on our deepest fears, I think, about our bodies being violated, about losing our identity, body horror at its finest, or worse, depending on how you look at it.
But I'm curious how much of this transformation in the original production was actually shown? Or was it more, like, left to the audience's imagination?
That's a good question, and I think it shows the power of suggestion in horror. Back in 1953, they had budget limitations, and the special effects weren't what they are today, so a lot of Carroon's transformation was implied, not directly shown.
Oh, I see.
The audience had to fill in the blanks, and that probably made it even scarier.
Right, because what you don't see can be way more terrifying.
Yeah.
So we're left with this mystery. What happened to the other astronauts? What's happened to Victor Carroon? I'm hooked.
Well, this is where things get even creepier. The story reveals that Carroon got infected by some alien life form during the mission.
What?
And it's absorbing his crewmates, using them to grow. It's not just a parasite, it's like a predator.
Oh, so this isn't just one man's transformation.
Yeah.
This is an alien entity that could spread, consume, threaten all of humanity. This is like an invasion scenario.
Exactly. And the stakes couldn't be higher. And think about where this all comes to a head. Westminster Abbey. It's not just a random place, the symbol, right?
Yeah.
British history, culture, faith.
So it's not just a monster on the loose. It's like the potential destruction of everything we hold dear.
Exactly. And if we remember the Cold War context, Westminster Abbey takes on even more meaning. It's the heart of British society, a target for this unseen enemy that everyone feared but couldn't really grasp.
And then, to make things even more intense, the film, they deliberately marketed it to adults. They even dropped the E from experiment in the title to capitalize on that new X certificate for films.
Oh, yes. Like they were saying, this is not for kids, folks.
This is the real deal.
Exactly. And it was. It wasn't shying away from the horror.
But here's something interesting. The original ending of the BBC TV serial was more nuanced, less action-packed. It focused on Professor Quatermass trying to communicate with, get this, the alien consciousnesses inside the monster.
That's such an interesting point. It goes to the heart of what makes Nigel Kneale's writing so great. He wasn't just about cheap scares or simple good versus evil. He wanted to explore the human side of these events, even when facing something totally alien.
So we have two very different endings. The TV serial with its focus on communication and the film's more action-oriented climax where the creature is destroyed. What do you think caused that shift?
That's a good question. Maybe it reflects a change in how people were feeling. With the Cold War and all, maybe there is a need for a more clear-cut resolution, a sense of good triumphing over evil.
Right.
Or maybe it was just because of how films are made. They often need a big, exciting finish.
Right. Right.
Whatever the reason, that change in ending raises a lot of questions about how the story has been interpreted over time.
Absolutely. And speaking of interpretations, there's one character who's at the center of it all. Professor Bernard Quatermass. He's the one behind the rocket project, the one who brings back this alien menace, but he's also trying to stop it.
He's a complex character, for sure. Not your typical hero.
Definitely not a villain, at least not in the traditional sense.
Yeah.
He's somewhere in between, driven by his scientific curiosity, but also weighed down by the consequences of his actions.
Exactly.
And it's interesting how he's portrayed differently in each adaptation. In the original TV serial, he's more sensitive, idealistic. But in the film, played by Brian Donlevy, he's much more gruff, even a little ruthless.
That's a really noticeable difference, and I think it shows how the character and the story itself have changed to fit different times and cultures.
So the question becomes, is Quatermass a hero or a villain? Or is he something else entirely?
That's the big question. It's what keeps people debating the Quatermass experiment, even now. He's so ambitious, wanting to push the limits of human knowledge, but that drive also makes him blind to the potential danger.
It's like he's a walking, talking example of the duality of scientific progress. The possibility of amazing discoveries, but also the risk of disastrous consequences.
Precisely. And that's why he's such a fascinating character. He reminds us that the pursuit of knowledge isn't always straightforward. There are ethical questions, unintended outcomes to consider.
It seems like with Quatermass, there are no easy answers. He forces us to think about what it means to be human, the line between good and evil, and how our own ambitions can lead us down dangerous paths.
Absolutely, and that's, I think, one of the reasons why the Quatermass experiment still resonates with people even today. It's not just a monster movie or a Cold War thriller. It's a story that makes us look inward, examine our own values, and face the unsettling idea that maybe the monsters we fear most are lurking within ourselves.
It's like he creates the problem, and then he's the only one who can fix it, stuck in this loop of his own making.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like a recurring theme in Kneale's work, Human responsibility when it comes to scientific progress. Quatermass isn't just watching this happen, he's right in the middle of it.
Which makes his actions even more interesting. Like there's this scene where he's arguing with the Ministry of Defense, insisting on going to extremes to stop Karun, even if it means like sacrificing him.
Yes.
Why? Is he feeling guilty? Does he have to fix what he's unleashed?
It's up to us to decide, I think, and that's what's so great about the character. Is it just scientific curiosity, or is there more to it? Maybe he feels responsible for what's happened to Karun. We don't get a straight answer, which makes you think.
I also noticed how Quatermass seems to see Karun as more of a science experiment gone wrong than a person who's suffering. There's even a line in the film where he calls Karun the subject.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty disturbing. It shows how science can make us lose sight of the human side of things, like data and experiments become more important than compassion.
And that kind of goes back to what we were saying about the Cold War. When people are scared of the unknown, of being wiped out, it's easy to start thinking that sacrificing individuals is okay for the greater good.
Exactly. And the Quatermass experiment shows those fears in a really powerful way. That alien infection, it becomes like a metaphor for, well, anything that could spread and corrupt from within, like communism.
Okay, so we've got this story with all these layers. Cold War fears, body horror, a main character who's not all good or all bad, but it was a big deal, right? It started a whole franchise, like a wave of British sci-fi and horror.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The Quatermass Experiment was a turning point for Hammer Films, the studio behind it. It was their first big horror hit.
Wow.
It showed that people wanted to see smart adult genre films, and it led to those classic Dracula and Frankenstein movies, which, well, they kind of defined British horror for a long time.
It's amazing to think one story back in 1953 had that much influence. But it wasn't just Hammer, right? The Quatermass Experiment, it kind of left its mark on a lot of other sci-fi and horror.
Yeah, definitely. You can see its influence all over. Like, take The Thing by John Carpenter. It has that same feeling of paranoia, the fear of the unknown, and that really intense body horror as the alien takes over. Even newer movies like Annihilation, they touch on similar themes: alien encounters, identity breaking down, that sort of thing.
It's really interesting to see how the Quatermass experiment is still inspiring filmmakers, and it shows how powerful those core themes are. Fear of the unknown, science going wrong, that fight between our humanity and our, well, our more basic instincts.
I think it also makes us think about where we fit in the universe, Are we alone? And if not, what happens when we run into something totally alien, something we don't understand and that could wipe us out?
Yeah, those are questions that have always been there, but the Quatermass experiment brings them to life in a really scary way.
Mm.
It makes you face the possibility that maybe we're not at the top, that there are forces out there we can't control, can't even imagine.
And it makes you ask, how would I react? Would I just freak out? Or would I find a way to use my smarts, my courage, my compassion to overcome it?
That's a big question, especially now with everything going on in the world, all the uncertainty. The Quatermass experiment shows us that even in the darkest times, we humans can be resilient, resourceful.
Right. But it also warns us not to blindly trust progress. It reminds us that gaining knowledge can have a price. And it asks us to think about whether our actions are right, especially if they could change, the very nature of existence.
Okay, so we've covered the historical context, the body horror, the main characters not so simple, the impact on film and TV. We've really gone deep with the Quatermass experiment.
Yeah, and I think one of the main things we've learned is that this isn't just an old story. It still has something to say to us today. It makes us think about science, our place in the universe, and what it means to be human.
It's the kind of story that stays with you,
Hmm.
makes you think about those big questions about life and everything. But there's one last thought I want to leave you with, and it's even more, well, more thought-provoking. We talked about the Quatermass experiment and the Cold War, but what if it's about something even deeper? Like maybe it's not just about threats from outside, but from inside us.
Hmm. That's interesting. It's almost like that alien thing, the one that takes over people's bodies. It represents like the dark side of human nature, the potential for our own instincts to, consume us.
Right. Like Karun, he doesn't just turn into a monster on the outside. He loses everything that makes him human. His compassion, his identity. It's like something primal is taking over, wiping away all those human qualities.
And that's what makes it so creepy. The real monster isn't necessarily from out there, but it's already inside us, waiting to be unleashed.
It's like the story's telling us that the line between being civilized and being savage, between human and monster, it's not as solid as we think.
Exactly. And that's a common theme in horror. It's not just the fear of the unknown, it's the fear of ourselves. What are we capable of when we lose control?
And the Quatermass experiment does that really well. It makes you think maybe the scariest monsters are the ones inside us.
It's a scary thought, but it's powerful too. Real horror doesn't always come from outside. It can come from within, from the choices we make, the things we're willing to accept, even the darkness we embrace sometimes.
It makes you wonder, how would you act in that kind of situation? Facing something unbelievable, would you hold on to your humanity, your sense of right and wrong? Or would you just give in to fear, anger, just trying to survive no matter what?
That's the big test, isn't it? And the Quatermass experiment puts that question to both the characters and the audience. It makes us confront the darker parts of ourselves, admit they exist, and think about what we might do when things get really bad.
So you brought us all these amazing sources about the Quatermass experiment, wanting to figure out why it's still so popular. We've looked at the history, the body horror, the Cold War, and even Professor Quatermass, who's not an easy guy to figure out.
Yeah, we've seen how this story that started on TV has become so influential, inspiring so many other sci-fi and horror works. And we've dug deeper, found those hidden meanings about the monsters hiding not just out there, but inside us too.
But I think the biggest thing to remember from all this is that the Quatermass experiment isn't just entertainment. It makes you think, it makes you question things, and it makes you face some hard truths about yourself and the world.
It's a story that sticks with you because it speaks to something deep inside all of us. Fear of the unknown, the fight to survive, and that constant struggle between good and evil within each of us.
So next time you watch a movie or read a book about aliens or monsters, think about the Quatermass experiment. Remember that the real horror might not be what you see, but what you choose not to see in yourself and the world around you.
Keep asking questions, keep exploring, keep digging deeper. Until next time.